Flesh and Blood is booming, and with that growth, more demand, and yes, higher prices. And as such, the ever-present discussions around prices, supply, and demand have increased in their intensity. However, a lot of these discussions are really glossing over some nuance of the situation, and in some cases they're completely ignoring that this game isn't a traditional market, nor does it follow a simple supply-demand curve.
A huge shout out to our channel members for supporting what we do here. If you want to get involved with the channel and the Dice Commando community, please consider joining as a channel member. Remember, these videos are only possible with your support. You can show that support with a like, a subscribe, and by leaving us a comment and sharing your feedback. Community first, and go Commando.
It's a debate nearly as old as the game itself, or at least since, say, the pandemic era. Flesh and Blood is too expensive. And the most interesting thing about that phrase, about the argument itself, is the word too. After all, it demands subjectivity. Too expensive is compared to what? Too expensive for whom? What is the acceptable cost? And where's the tipping point? Now, certainly we have to acknowledge it's a different answer for everyone. For years, I've maintained the same position, that the wider game of Flesh and Blood can be enjoyed very affordably. For fractional trades in power level, an $80 card can be swapped for a 5-cent one. The game itself can be played and enjoyed at a very affordable level. And yes, I do still very much believe that to be true. But there's no denying that fully tuned competitive Flesh and Blood is unquestionably, massively, and dare I say, prohibitively expensive. It's probably the most expensive game out there with comparable lifespan, although I certainly acquiesce that I by no means know all games. And with the latest set, The Hunted, this became much, much worse with the introduction of another generic staple Majestic in Shelter from the Storm. No longer is it just your CNCs, but now shelters setting a 400 to 500 US base before literally anything else. Certainly, Flesh and Blood's global growth has put incredible stress on the staples and class and archetype tools alike, and even the injection of the staple reprints through the Japanese archive packs has done little to stem the tide. And while sure, the discussion around the price of Flesh and Blood isn't exactly a new one, the discussion has renewed relevance and vigor given where we're at right now. However, something's been bothering me about many of these discussions is that they are missing, or even outright ignoring, two rather crucial pieces of this puzzle. The first is that Flesh and Blood is not a typical supply-demand model. Legend Story Studios has effectively created an environment with Flesh and Blood in which there's really no ceiling, so to speak, on what many players will pay. Sure, they may grumble about having to drop $200 on a playset, but they still do it, right? Ironically, making the price hold or even go up faster. Hunter's Clave was but the most recent such example. Everyone knows that Clave is not a good long-term purchase at 40 plus US. But hey, you needed 2 to 3 of them for RTN season, so suck it up, Buttercup. After all, folks, someone buying flights and hotel to go around the world to attend $150 events every other weekend, that person certainly doesn't really care about spending $200 on a playset of cards. Now, let's be clear about something. Saying that demand is outpacing supply is not functionally wrong. But you can't have that conversation without also acknowledging the captive market with, seemingly, infinitely deep bank accounts. Because remember back to Econ 101, a traditional supply-demand model dictates that as prices go up, demand will shift accordingly. At a certain point, a portion of consumers are priced out of the market. And while that may be true for normal folks like you and me, who look at Shelter and say, nah, I'm good with my sinks, the environment created by competitive Flesh and Blood dominates. As such, that's a place where the supply-demand argument really stumbles. Approaching supply-demand conversations with the primary indicator being singles prices is really not telling the complete story. Now, the second hiccup in many of these arguments, to bring us back home, is the subjectivity. In order to say what the right supply is, we'd have to actually agree on what the correct price for a card actually is. And good luck on that, when we as a community rarely agree on basically anything. While many of us can probably agree that a $100 staple card is way too high to be sustainable, there's very little chance we'd agree on what that acceptable price really is. To me, 25 to 30 seems fairly reasonable for a highly demanded Chase Majestic, but someone else will want 10 and someone else even lower. All the while, our super unbiased market gurus are complaining that the low price is ruining the market and killing the game. Add in the fact that you also have predatory players within the market who rely upon volatility and FOMO, who utilize their resources to manipulate the markets, and good luck again aligning on our acceptable target. Shelter from the Storm is a relevant current example of exactly this. While pretty much everyone in the community can really agree that $100 for a generic 3-of staple, probably not very sustainable. However, what should that price actually be? A lot of people were pretty happy with the card when it was 80. But what about 30? What about 10? What about 50? What's the correct number? So look, it's not that I disagree with the raw statement that there is more demand than supply. I believe it to be functionally correct. But it's really missing the nuance of the situation. Because without knowing what the end goal is, or knowing what the right target is, simply saying that we need more has no real meaning. Now, we can go round and round about singles prices relative to box prices and the whole role that EV plays in a healthy, sustainable market, and how the push-pull between the two results in more boxes being or not being opened. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, because only one entity knows what the end objective and target actually is. Furthermore, the best that LSS can do once a set is printed is adjust the supply numbers for the next set and iterate it each time. And since what's driving Flesh and Blood's growth is the competitive circuit, after all, it must be because players don't seem phased at today's prices, then it unfortunately begs the question of if it's actually a problem at all. After all, Ferrari doesn't really care if you can't afford one. Unfortunately, though, the ramifications of that realization are pretty significant because, while yes, Flesh and Blood is too expensive is subjective, more and more players are finding that they're on the wrong side of that line. And while yes, as I continually champion, Flesh and Blood can be enjoyed at extremely affordable levels, the competitive first nature of this game drives the desire, and let's be honest, expectation, to have that marginal card advantage and thus the feeling of needing to have it all. So the conclusion: yes, FaB is more expensive than I'd like it to be. Yes, I believe that we need more supply and more prevalent staples reprints. Of course we do. Everyone's on board with that. But it's only fair to acknowledge that the game is doing fine and is growing, which is the whole problem statement, even in spite of that. So, does anything need done? Not in the truest sense, no. But as that 2 line moves farther up, we may just find, though, that a lot of folks get left behind. Thanks for watching, and go Commando.